All right, I think we've probably hit critical mass. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again for joining us. Today's webinar, an energy code roadmap to success for your building department. I kind of put this together for all the stuff that I go around Texas and travel and talk to a lot of cities. There's a lot of the same questions, the same responses, the same concerns, the same thought process. So I just thought I would put something together and kind of go across the board with everybody, try to get them on the same page, have some forms to show, to try to smooth out some ripples when you're trying to adopt an energy code. But as always, this webinar is being recorded today. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which you can find by either going to YouTube and searching SPEAR, or you can go directly to our website at eepartnership.org. And under our news section, you'll find our resources page. Once you're on a resources page, you'll find a link directly to our channel. We have well over 150 videos uploaded on a variety of topics. There's some stuff that Sean does. There's a lot that I do. Today's webinar is also eligible for IECC CEUs. You must be present for at least 3/4 of the presentation today. Within about 72 hours, you'll receive a course evaluation email from Kathy Lawrence. Please fill that out on the survey. Give me back any feedback that you can to help us improve or add topics for what you'd like to see in our future webinars that we have going. Once you've complete that and you send it back, she'll send you a completion certificate that will contain the title and course ID number that you'll need when reporting your CEUs to ICC. I also have the chat feature open. Use that to report any technical difficulties or questions that you may have. I also have the Q&A feature open, so you feel free to post questions there. We'll answer them as we go through the presentation. I don't have a lot of slides. I'll try to keep this from being a energy raiders rambling, but there's a lot of stuff that I bring to the table with being in third-party energy for 10 years and now trying to train building officials or cities or councils talking about adoption of the energy code and help training of the energy code. There's a lot of the same questions. So I just thought I'd throw that together. If anyone's new to the channel today and watching our webinar today, who is SPEAR? We're a nonprofit. We're a a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We are member-based. We stretch across a variety of energy efficiency industries, representatives from manufacturers, other third parties, some cities, other organizations out there that are also nonprofits. Our focus is on outreach of education and collaboration on clean energy and the adoption and acceleration of the energy code. That's kind of what I do. We can provide training, webinars, in-person, field training, as well as IECC test prep training for anyone looking to get certified. Our training is always free. We're contracted to do this work throughout Texas and Oklahoma. I can help answer questions regarding the energy code, ASHRAE 90.1, questions from plan reviewers, building officials, third-party inspectors, or if there's a conflict between, we can try to help smooth that out. I'm always happy to help. We've assisted several cities with the adoption of the 21 and other codes. We help them navigate through additional amendments to try to lessen the impact of the adoption when it comes to city and city building officials, the inspectors, the plan reviewers, and permit techs to the building industry itself. So my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. You can text me, you can email me, you can call me. We'll discuss it. We'll talk about it. I can also hold a one-on-one Zoom call, and we can help discuss things that's on your plate that you're dealing with. So energy code roadmap to success for your building department. What does that mean? What was I trying to do here? It's basically we're trying to point at a target. In other words, look at what the intent is for the energy code. I'll just read it directly out of the book. The code states that the energy code or this code shall regulate the design and construction of buildings for effective use of conservation of energy over the useful life of each building. This code is intended to provide flexibility to permit the use of innovative approaches and techniques to achieve the objective. This code is not intended to abridge safety, health, or environmental requirements contained in other applicable codes or ordinances. With that being said, there's multiple ways of showing compliance with the energy code. There's several different pathways. We'll talk about those in just a minute, but they all reach the same target, and the target is to lower energy consumption for the serviceable life of the building. It's not for the occupant. I know there's a lot of custom homes being built. There's things that city or third parties ask the builder to do. The homeowner says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to pay for it. It's not for the occupant building the home. It's for the serviceable life of the building. So that energy consumption includes anything that takes to heat and cool the home, also ventilation, mechanical ventilation, water heating, kitchen appliances, and permanent lighting. This does not include plug loads such as lamps, TVs, computers, countertop appliances, etc. So having a plan for a new adoption can greatly increase the success of adoption and can help make the process of adoption easier in the future. So I see a lot of cities holding off on adopting an updated energy code. It's surprising me now that a lot of them are going to the 21 building codes, but leaving the energy code at the 15 or the 18. It's for various reasons. It seems like maybe it's just a hill that's too big to climb, or it's just kind of not worth the effort. It's not, in most people's opinion, it's not health and safety. We're not really going to be concerned about it. That's not really the point of having an energy code and having it part of the iCode suite. I've seen several cities that's done this. I usually get the same general questions of where do we start. If there's some that are interested and say, look, we didn't adopt it because we weren't sure how to take this on. We weren't sure how to progress forward. So a lot of the things we'll bring up to the table about what other cities are doing throughout Texas and Oklahoma to try to help you identify areas where maybe a larger city that's close to you have adopted it with specific amendments that would help you not have a large impact on the building or the building community that's in your area. So as we go through this webinar, it's my opinion. This is all a short list of things that CBO or building officials should be focusing on when it comes to the energy code. Again, I'm trying to keep this from being a third-party energy verifiers or energy raters ramble, but a lot of it comes from now 2 years in with SPEAR and seeing it from a different perspective. There's some stuff I think we can add to the table for conversation and to help ease into this. So by the end of this webinar, you'll start to see that the acceleration of adoption of an updated energy code is already happening around you. There's some cities that are holding off, but smaller municipalities that may not fully understand the impact or don't really have a lot of building in their community right now, they go ahead and adopt it. Well, the 21 and other energy codes are happening around you. We're just trying to get consistency across the state. So builders or national builders that come in and build across county or city lines, it's not a confusion of what to do and how to do it. Just this morning, I just posted this real quick and put this in this webinar, but just this morning, there was a post on LinkedIn over today's topic titled Pros and Cons of Municipalities Utilizing Third-Party Inspectors, Balancing Efficiency and Accountability. So that credit goes to Wayne Snell, who's the Director of Inspections with the City of Irving. Though I know he was talking about all types of third-party inspectors that you can contract with the city, I think his points are valid when talking solely about a third-party energy verifier. The pros can include increased capacity and flexibility. It allows for your inspectors to get back to what is health and safety, and it allows for some flexibility of inspection times, and now you've got a lighter schedule. None of this is ever intended to remove an inspector from a building official's role. It's basically to aid them in getting back their time in what's really important in the health and safety of the building. You get access to specialized experts. So who's more versed in doing energy inspection? It's the one that's been taught and trained in building science and is IECC certified to actively do that job that's in front of you for that inspection. Cost savings, it can, again, loosen up some of your inspections. You can use that for the builders now. Of course, it's kind of a contentious point of saying, well, the builder pays the third party, so I can't really trust what they're doing. That's part of the cons. I get that. I understand that. But when you're a certified energy rater, your certification, just like any certification that a building official has, can be taken away from you at any time, regardless of whether your company has made an agreement with a builder to do something that's unethical or incorrect when it comes to doing the energy code. It's your certification's on the line. If it gets removed and pulled, you're going to have to go find a different career. So it's one of those things where I think we need to look at, they do have a skin in the game, each person individually and the companies that are there. Let's see, Robert put in here, I don't think they know difference between home inspectors and code inspectors. That's true, Robert. Thank you for bringing that up. So there are trek inspectors or home inspectors that are paid by the buyer of a property, and they pay for them to do a home inspection. And then there's code inspectors, which are, building officials. That's how I look at it. And then there's third party inspectors, which are paid by the builder to provide a service that allows them to provide documentation for compliance with the cities, or compliance to an energy code, or compliance to an above code program. You'll need a third party energy verifier to actually do the inspections and do the testing that's required by code. So thanks for bringing that up, Robert. I appreciate it. Hopefully that answered that. If not, someone can post another question if you'd like. Improved efficiency, reduced admin burden. So you're kind of, if there's a roadblock or there's a bottleneck of permit time because they're waiting on specific things, third parties can provide documentation that helps speed that up and reduce admin burden and bottleneck that's in the city. Improved efficiency by just having a turnkey going through this. And of course, the decreased turnaround. You get permitting done quicker because you've got someone else looking at it and or providing documentation that shows the compliance that it's met for the energy code. Cons, of course, you've got reduced control and consistency. Each third party is different. Each third party has a different focus. I always like to compare it to, you have building officials that were, maybe their lifetime career was plumbing, and now they're a building official because they're getting closer to retirement and working for the city. Their main focus is going to be plumbing because that's what they know. And so if energy is not really something they're going to want to understand or grasp, they kind of leave it to somebody else, or it's not really verified. So that happens more out in the county and rural areas. Of course, potential conflict of interest. Sometimes there's third parties that request something of the builder to do certain things, and maybe the city doesn't see that that's necessary. It's not really, and it's one of those things where you almost have to have the third parties back if you're a building official, because you need to stand behind them to say they're the experts, they're the ones that know the energy code, they're the ones that's been trained in building science. I'm not here to argue with what they're asking. If they're asking you to do this, then we suggest you move forward in what they're recommending you to do. There's a lot of times where, when I was doing it for 10 years, I mean, you can't count how many or how high, with how many times it was red tagged at pre-drywall, and then you basically find out later that the city has passed it. It's been sheetrocked and the builder never fixed anything going forward. It could potentially detriment to the blower door at the end. The blower door is going to fail due to what was asked to be done before sheetrock. It's one of those things where if you're a building official, just look at it from a third party's perspective and say, they're the expert, and then the energy side of it. If there's a conflict or a disagreement, you can always reach out to them and ask, what was your intent here? What are you asking them to do? And how does this make any difference? Accountability concerns. Now, when the third party signs off on these forms, you'll see later, the accountability shifts over to a third party energy verifier. They're taking responsibility to show that it's compliant to the energy code. So that kind of removes it away from the cities. I know they have protection when it comes to someone going after the city, but if you had a third party that signed off on it and there was a complaint later on by the homeowner, it can always just be that, look, you got to reach out to your third party that did this. We're kind of out of the picture when it comes to that. Loss of institutional knowledge. If there's not someone in the city that's actively still updating their energy code certification, or at least learning and knowing about it, your building official team of inspectors aren't going to know when it's wrong. So there may be some bad apple third parties out there that are kind of just writing green tags and moving on. So having institutional knowledge is always key, and just at least knowing what you're looking at. We'll talk about more of that later on in today's webinar. Cost and contractual complexities. There's cost to doing some of this as far as letting third parties do that. Sometimes you have to hire a manager to help manage the paperwork and the organizational path of how this follows through your city. And then, of course, the scarcity of qualified inspectors. We all know and understand that there's a workforce shortage out there. So if you go to a place that hasn't been active on updating energy codes, and now suddenly they're jumping to a newer energy code, there may not be third parties in that area to support leaving this to third parties and not having building officials being part of it. But there's third parties that may be in a metroplex that's not far from you that will be happy to hire someone and put them in your area to help start filling that gap. So I'll summarize his conclusion to the whole thing. He said third-party inspectors offer flexibility, expertise, and cost savings for municipalities, but also raise concerns about control and accountability. A balanced approach, using them selectively while maintaining a strong in-house team, can help meet demand without compromising inspection quality. So careful planning and oversight are essential to ensure this approach supports public safety. And we'll get deeper in the weeds about that in the next coming slides and talk more about how a city can move away from doing energy inspections, but still hold up a lot of quality and a strong in-house team to help support their public safety and concerns for their building community. So pathways through code, we've always talked about this. I've talked about it in other webinars, but Texas is kind of unique. As I find out and talk to others throughout the United States that they actually manage other states. Texas is unique where we have 7 acceptable pathways to show compliance through the energy code. So we have prescriptive, which is just a list. It's like a recipe that you're opening the book. Everything's right there in a table. You're just listing all of the R value, the U factor, the F factor, which is new to the newest energy code to show compliance. Then you've got a total UA alternative trade-off. It's changing names to component trade-off, or component alternative trade-offs. Basically, you're trading things off in just the envelope. You're not looking at mechanicals. You're not really looking at lighting. You're looking at just the envelope itself. So, lowering the windows for greater insulation in the attic or vice versa. Then you have simulated building performance, which used to be known as total building performance. Now it's moved to a simulated performance alternative or pathway. There's a software now that's needed to show specifics it's the same kind of thing. You're kind of putting the ingredients together. You're putting it into the software. You build what's called a referenced model, and it's compared to the house being built. And then, of course, that's got to meet or be below in energy consumption to actually pass. That's also changing just a little bit. For the 2015, 18, and the 21, you've got an annual energy consumption needs to be equal to or less than the referenced model. Starting in newer codes going forward, some of the pathways that you take may have to be 80% of the reference model or better. Then they're also bringing in a greater reduction of 5% when you have homes that are larger than 5,000 square feet. So there's just more and more complexities of this. They're trying to, in other words, kind of penalize the energy use of larger homes to try to add a little bit of a reduction. You're kind of keeping it on the same playing field for the smaller homes. If a home's all electric, use different calculations for different climate zones can be used. They're based on total thermal conductance. And when you compare it to the prescriptive model, I know it's getting a little bit too technical in that part of it, but it's coming up in the soon-to-be energy codes being adopted around Texas and Oklahoma. Of course, we have the ERI. It's just a 2-digit number that ratchets up and down. It shows kind of the miles per gallon of a house and how efficient it really is. House Bill 3215 allowed for Energy Star and HERS to be an acceptable pathway parallel to the energy code and a replacement to an energy code pathway. There are backstops to that. There are lowest levels of compliance. It's not just you're not just throwing the code book in the trash. You've got backstops to that. Right now, currently the backstops for 2018 for Energy Star and the ResNet HERS program. But with the Energy Star, the EPA basically on that program, it's an above code program. It can be used for permitting. It's mostly heavily based on mechanical performance of HVAC, ventilation, and exhaust systems. You need software to show compliance. That again kind of gets into those weeds of, well, now it's kind of outside of just the city inspectors because now it takes a third party software report to show compliance, and there's a full granulated checklist that has to be gone through and verified. There's much more testing and verification that's required to actually meet the requirements of the Energy Star program. There's QA, QC oversight from EPA approved verification organizations such as BSI, which is the Building Science Institute based out of Texas, or ResNet. They're also in there to oversee what's actually being done. And then, of course, we have the HERS, which is kind of how ERI got into the code, was developed by ResNet, and then it was called something different for copyright reasons, but it is technically the same thing. It's a sliding scale. There's QA/QC oversight to that, same as Energy Star. And then, of course, we also have the North Central Texas Council of Governments version of the IECC. Currently, right now, they're reviewing the 2024 to come up with their North Texas COG amended code. That basically is for climate zones 2 and 3 that can be adopted in different cities throughout Texas that can see that as an acceptable pathway. It kind of lessens some of the requirements to make it easier for the builder, but yet it doesn't lower energy consumption or energy efficiency. It continues to keep the energy consumption at bay. So which one to pick? A lot of times what I do and what we're contracted to do is teach the energy code for 2021. We're now getting approval for going 2024. But a lot of cities that have waited for the adoption of 21 are now on that fence post of, do we go 21 now, or do we just jump over and go 24 now that it's hit the ground? Again, in my opinion, and from what I've heard and the people that I've talked to and the webinars that I listen to and the Zoom calls that I'm on, it's going to be a difficult conversation. However, with the 24, some people are calling this a more cleaned up version of the energy code. There were errors and poorly clarified requirements in the 21. They were cleaned up in the 24. If you kept up with the creation of the 24, it almost went mostly or heavily all electrification. That kind of got removed and put into an appendix. So it's still a very acceptable code in Texas for being oil and gas states, and Oklahoma as well. But it's more of a cleaned up. If you look at the prescriptive table and you compare the 21 to the 24, you'll see a big difference in attic insulation levels return to the 2018 IECC levels in the 24, as opposed to the deeper insulation that was required in the 21. There are multiple reasons why they were able to do this. A better understanding of it is people actually were able to push the understanding of diminishing return. You can't just keep throwing insulation to a problem and expect greater results. There becomes a point where you're not getting any more energy efficiency out of it beyond roughly an R42. So having R60 and going higher in our climate zones aren't really reaping any more benefits. That's kind of how I took what they were talking about in those meetings about it, and they were able to ratchet it back down. However, it's made up somewhere else in the code book, but it's easier for builders to get to the point of using those. So additionally, a new role was added to the prescriptive table that's basically talking about insulation that's entirely above roof deck. So if you look at it, it's no longer just ceiling insulation, and it's looking at how deep is my blown insulation going to be. It's also roof decking insulation that's outside of that. It does not touch on or talk about foam that's under roof decks, but there's cities that are making amendments to that to understand it better. So if you look at the slide, there's a 10-point credit system also was applied. There was additional energy efficiency requirements that were in the 21 that was only for that's for all pathways. That's been kind of removed and taken away and moved into the existing section of the code book, existing building section. But now there's a 10-point credit system that applies to prescriptive only. And then, of course, we talked about it earlier. It's the additional 5 points needed for 5,000 square feet buildings or more. The simulated performance, or the ERI, does not have to take these additional credits, but as I said earlier, it also comes down to when you're comparing it to a referenced home, you're no longer equal to or less than. It's going to start ratcheting down to like 85% of that referenced home. That's how they're getting it more energy efficient. And of course, I'm just not going to go through all of these. These are the additional energy efficiency options that were on the 2021 code for all pathways. As you can see, it was envelope improvements. It was more efficient HVAC equipment. It was reduced water heating. It was efficient duct thermal distribution, kind of putting all the ducts in conditioned space. And then improving air sealing and efficient or effective ventilation, which was an ERV instead of just a air handler or a standalone fan. Most cities in Texas that I talked to either amended the 21 and deleted this section entirely, or it's just not enforced. This basically was the 8 or 9% increase in energy efficiency when you compare it to the 18. This is how we got more energy efficiency out of residential buildings. So removing and deleting this section kind of pushed you right back into an 18 level of compliance. So again, won't go through all of that. These will be moving on past that. But if you're going to adopt the 21, this is something we can talk about. I can help with that on the understanding of how hard really is it for a builder to do this, and then what's the compliance pathway they need to do to get there. In other words, if you do a tankless water heater, then you've already got option number 3. Most builders that I've seen out there, especially the national builders, have moved to that equipment, which basically gets them option 3, and you move on, and that's your additional energy efficiency option that was selected. This should be on the forms. We'll talk about the forms in a minute, but it should be on the forms and or shown in a res check or an IC3 or another compliance reporting software that shows what is the additional efficiency option that was taken, and then it needs to be verified in the field that it actually was done. Of course, we've talked about this in multiple webinars, but software needs to be shown for compliance. There's prescriptive can basically be shown in just a one-page report. I mean, it could just be handwritten by someone and says, this is all the things I'm going to do. And then that's just turned in with permit documents. And it just shows a list of recipe items that they're just putting together to say, this is what we're going to do. Well, now someone has to verify that every single one of those items are met. If one is deviated from, it probably no longer is compliant to the energy code. Let's see, we've got Res Check and ComCheck, which are free. They're developed by PNNL and DOE. We've got IC3, which is also free. It's developed by the Energy Systems Labs in Texas A&M. I say a lot of times you don't really need a licensing software to do that. You can just kind of fill that out and put it together. It should be done by someone that is versed in the energy code to help design this correctly so it can be turned in for a compliance as a compliance document. As I said earlier, there are now some third parties that are just doing a one-pager for prescriptive. No longer will you be able to just look at it and say, am I meeting or exceeding code? You're going to have to open the book and actually look at the prescriptive table to verify compliance. And then it's got to be verified in the field as well. And then you've got Ecotrope, Rim Rate, and Energy Gauge. Those are not free. They do support the Energy Star, the HERS, and LEED program. Those are going to be required if you're doing any of those above code programs. You can do a basic code compliance report, but since they have to pay a licensing fee, sometimes if they're running short on time, or it's cleaner and easier to do a res check or an IC3. There's a question here. Can you please add House Rater as well? Yes. Sorry, House Rater is one of them as well. There's another software out there that helps also in the inspection process. It's an easy way to walk through. Most third parties that I've talked to, they have some form of inspection software that basically walks them through what they're doing. It shows what the house should be. They compare what they see with their own eyes in the field. And if it meets it, they say it passes. If it doesn't, then they say it fails and they have to put the difference. And then we'll talk about if there was a difference, what should happen later on as well. So there is, I just throw this in here real quick because there's, again, some cities that I'm seeing that are adopting 21 I codes, but they're leaving the 15 or 18 for energy code. As I said earlier, the 21 is happening all around you. As of April 26, 2024, HUD published the final energy standards determination in the Federal Registry. It is now that HUD, USDA, and FHA will now have to conform to a 2021 IECC unamended or ASHRAE 90.1-2019 for its minimum energy efficiency standards. So if you have a government funded program in your community and your city is still only on the 15 or the 18, this will have to be shown as compliant to an unamended 2021. So your building officials will need to understand it. Your plan reviewers will need to understand it. Your permit techs will need to understand what they need to look for to show compliance. So if there's any question on that, the table to the right is basically showing the compliance date and when it starts. A lot of it really doesn't happen until late 2025, and some of it pushes into 2026. But it's something that you need to prepare for, especially if you're talking about which code are we adopting now. If you're going to adopt from the 15 and you just decide, well, we're going to go 18, you may have a HUD program that comes in to do apartments, or maybe it's a like 3-story apartment that's all residential. It must now comply, or even of a commercial building, it's going to have to comply with the 2021, and you'll have to do inspections based on that, or have a third-party energy verifier that's in the mix with this that can verify compliance. So when you're looking at doing an adoption, yes, there's a question here talking about, could I share the links? Yes, I'll do that in the survey email. I'll send links that that I've shared with you in this presentation. Yes. So when you're looking at adopting the code and you're looking at moving to a different code, don't just leave that to what your staff can do. Lean on the industry leaders for information. Present the changes early and easy to read formats. This is kind of to the right. Yes, Guadalupe, I can share the PowerPoint as well. Yes. To the right, this is just it's a one-pager from NEMA that's just showing kind of the benefits for builders, and there's rebates and incentives and offsetting energy efficiency upgrades. But lean on that. There's people from ICC, there's trade associations, there's energy sector nonprofits, kind of like Spear. There are third parties. The energy guys that are in your area would be happy to put on a training to help train your building community. It does not just help them, it helps everybody. So post these kind of things in the entrance of your building department and your entrance to the city hall. Show this thing early, include it on your website. This is where we're going, this is what we're doing. Have a place that they can go field questions. Feel free to put my name on there. I'm on the SECO's website for their technical assistance to the energy code for the state of Texas. So I'd be happy to help answer questions and not have you guys be inundated with those. Put me on your website and just have me, or at least link it to SECO's website. Include sunset and sunrise dates. So show when the older code is going to no longer be accepted when the new code takes effect. A lot of time the sunrise date could be 6 months from the time of adoption. In other words, we're going to start working towards compliance and enforcement, but we're going to give you a window of 90 days to 120 days to 180 days to get your building industry up to par before you start having a look. Now's the time we're red tagging for this and we will not move forward in construction if it's not met. So make sure to verify by meaning that whether it's the permit date or the closing date. Usually people just say, by January 1 of 2025, any permits after that will have to comply with the new energy code. You can do that. If it's too late now for that, you can do it mid-summer next year. But we can always, Spear can help with that. We'd be happy to help with training. I try to get the word out about wired free training and what we can offer and how we can help. I'm really taken up with that, and no one really, has me involved in that, because it is a tense conversation between all departments. There's probably several departments that don't want to see it. There's others that understand it. If you have a sustainability manager on site, they understand it from the point of air quality reporting and energy consumption reporting to the PUCs, and those things all start coming together. So as I put here, assemble the right team. So it's obvious that you're going to have building staff there, building department staff, but other staff members as well need to be in the conversation. So sustainability managers, is there someone reporting to the PUCs? Well, energy reports can help have you have the numbers for those reporting. Is there community development as well in there? There's some things that you can talk about. Well, if you've got a community that's going to be built that may have 2,000 homes in it, and it's going to involve 8 different builders, let's get everyone on the same page, because not all 8 builders are going to have the same third parties. There will be difference of opinions and different compliance pathways for every builder, and it starts to become very complicated when you've got a large community that's built with multiple builders using different pathways and using different third parties. You can't walk down the street anymore and say, why is this builder having to do this and this builder not? It's because they're taking different pathways. So air quality managers, city future vision. The city that I live in has a future plan of where they're going and what they're doing. A lot of times you can just keep them abreast of where the energy codes are moving to and try to help include some of that in the future vision of your city. Code compliance, even though a lot of that's just, there's trash in the yard hasn't been mowed, but I still do think some of these code compliance guys would benefit from just being in the room talking about other code compliance stuff when it comes to energy, because it's not just flipping on a switch. It now is more complex than that, and it goes deeper than just flipping on a switch. Developmental services, same thing as kind of your community development. Water quality guys, if they're reporting water quality or involved in the testing of water quality, just having them in the room. Environmental services, contractor services, HVAC, framers, builders, anybody that deals with a building industry, being in the room and talking about it. And then housing authority and low income housing. We just talked about the slide a second ago about the HUD and USDA stuff. City managers and council members. I know that'll be a harder one for people to have them be part of the room, but once they see the vision of what the energy code can do for the city and the community, they're going to bring it up in their meetings as well and start including this. Now, town hall meetings is big too. I won't spend too much on time on this, but if you're starting to look towards adopting an energy code at one of your, if you maybe you already do town hall meetings every 6 months in the community. If you don't, hold a town hall meeting and invite all the people we just talked about and even the community around there and homeowners to sit and listen to what's being planned, and that you're there to answer questions. Set expectations of responsibilities of what it is that it needs from everybody, from the city, from the building official, from the third party, all of them. So have builders, developers, architects, contractors, third parties, and commissioning agents there as well. One thing I bring up every time I do talk is contractor registration. I know plumbers, electrical, concrete, all these guys, they have to register as a contractor. Some cities require most of them to at least pay a registration fee. This is from a city that's in North Texas. As you can see, I highlighted here that the energy inspectors also have to pay a $100 fee annually to the city to register as a contractor. So if you're not currently having energy inspectors as a contractor that registers with your city, whether they pay a fee or don't pay a fee is kind of up to the city and what they want to do. But of course, they're going to have to show proof of insurance. They're going to have to meet the insurance liabilities of what your city requires as a contractor. But just having them do that and then verifying their active status. And just like with electrical inspector or anything with the other I codes, their certifications only last 3 years. So once that's 3 years is up, they either have enough continuing education credits to renew, or they have to take the test again, of course. But someone should be verifying, let me see your certification, and you look at their number up. And on the next slide here, there's 2 websites you can go to verify third-party energy verifier certifications. I did not, sorry, I know just now I did not include the one for BSI. I will do that shortly, but you can look up Building Science Institute in Texas. They have the same thing. What you do is put the person's name in there or their certification number, and you can verify, is their status still active? So that's ICC. It's free. It's open to the public. Resnet has one. Then, of course, BSI has one as well. I always say verify monthly or verify annually or verify at time of permit request. So when you see it listed on the permit document of who's doing it, just open that company's folder and look through the folder and just say who's all there and are all their certifications still active. If not, reach out to them via an email and say, I need an updated certification on Steve Smith or whoever that's listed there because it's already expired or going to expire before this contract or this builder is finished with this home. So verify. The form I just showed you early from that city, they do that on an annual basis and reach out to everyone for updated certifications, including driver's license that match their certification. And of course, add a list of third-party energy verifiers to your website. City of Austin does this really well, but if you're moving to another code, or let's say your city's always done the inspections and now you're going to start including third parties, your building industry is going to have a kind of a hard time going, well, who do I go with? How do I know who to call? What am I supposed to do? You guys now brought this on us and I don't know who to call. will have a list of all the ones that have registered in your city, include their contact information, their phone, their email, and or their website. And then you have them, we'll just go to our website and look under contractor and look under energy contractors and just pick someone and call them and start getting basically your bidding to find out who's going to be the price that's going to fit your needs of what you need for your building community or what you're doing for your homes. So have that listed there and just help them out not to have to panic with it, because that again brings up another bottleneck and a burden of efficiency when it comes down to, I don't know who to call, because I know when I go to a new area and start searching third-party energy verifiers, when you put in the word energy, it straight goes to TXU, Reliant, all these energy companies. It's hard to pin down and find somebody that's a verifier. You start having to reach out to ICC, ResNet, or BSI and start looking to see who's in their list in that area. So energy compliance forms required. This should always happen. There are one for permit, which is the projected rating. It's basically the builder telling you what they intend to do. Doesn't mean that they're going to do all of that. They may get to the supply house and realize that they don't have certain things in stock. So they're going to take the next best thing. That could have a possibility of no longer being compliant to the energy code, and you don't really know that. So projected rating is the energy report that's due for permit requests or time of application. That is not the final confirmed rating. So for the final, you have a confirmed rating that basically, from all the data that was collected in the field during inspections and all the testing information, has now been put back into the projected rating. The model's been reran and verified to be either compliant or no longer compliant, and adjustments have to be made. So in my opinion, these should also be asked for prior to a CO inspection. So I know there's one city in particular that if a builder uses Energy Star, he will not go out on a CO inspection until he gets an Energy Star certified certificate for that home. The problem with that is when a third party does their final energy inspections, if they collect all that data, the person in the field a lot of times is not the one doing the energy modeling. It's someone else back at their office. They're going to have to collect that data, take it back to the office, and or do it electronically. And now that information needs to be reran in a projected rating to get a confirmed rating to now show compliance to print off a certificate. Sometimes the backlog in those departments are 3 or 4 days out. So a builder will need to schedule close to a week before CO to have their final energy done. There was many times I was asked to go do a final energy inspection before noon to get a CO inspection at 3. That's too tight of a window and should not be allowed, because there could be something that's no longer compliant because the builder had to choose something different during the time of construction. The forms, this is straight off the North Texas or North Central Texas Council of Governments website. There's a PDF there that you can edit, and as you can see, you can insert your city seal up on the lower left or the top left corner. This is a projected and or permit document request for what's given to the builder for permit request to show what is the compliance pathway that's being followed. So here we show 5 options: prescriptive, total building performance, ICC, showing the ERI, and then the Energy Star, and then of course the HERS as well. And then the person signing off on it, name and version of the software, is also has to be labeled. The agency and their certification number needs to be put on there, signed by the responsible party. This is where liability now shifts over to the third party to show it's their responsibility for showing compliance. And of course, then they print the name and title and responsibility of that party. They'll just put energy inspector, energy rater, energy modeler. But once that happens, you can go search their certification. If it says ICC or IECC and then their 7-digit number, or now it's possibly 8-digit numbers, that you can go look up on ICC's website using those links and verify their certification. But as I said earlier, the biggest takeaway from this is just a projected. It's not a final energy report. It's just what they are planning on doing. It doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. This is the final certification form that's required, in my opinion, before CO. This needs to be turned in and verified by a third party. This shows I now attest and certify that testing has now passed and that visual verifications have passed, and it's signed off on and given to either the builder electronically or it's left at the house. And then there are some cities that have a portal on their website that this gets sent into that portal. The city inspector will get a request for CO inspections. He'll go look at that portal. If this form isn't there for that address, he will not conduct the CO inspection. He will cancel that inspection until he receives this form. That, in my opinion, is the best way to show compliance and to keep it on the same level of compliance for all builders. But of course, it must include the project and permit number, and then it shows the results of leakage tests, the duct testing for every system. Then you show mechanical ventilation testing, and there's also room to put bath fan and bath fan and kitchen exhaust system testing as well, which is now part of the 2021 and the IRC and the IECC and mechanical code to have those tested and verified to meet compliance of ventilation air. And then now you're going to look at just adopting code. Now everything's set in motion. You're ready. You've put it out into the community. You've put it on your website. You've got a list of third parties. You're now going to adopt the code and move forward. Of course, then you're going to review it. You're going to make amendments. You're going to look at the amendments of what you feel would be best for your community. You set the sunset and sunrise dates. You allow time for adjustments. We talked about 90 days, 120 days. And then, of course, my biggest takeaway with that is understand that flexibility could mean non-compliance. So if you're being too flexible with them, they're never really going to comply. And then when that sunrise date or sunset date comes up, and now they must be compliant, well, the flexibility that you've allowed for those 60, 90, 120 days have gotten them used to doing it a certain way, and now you're asking them to change it at the end. And that's going to be a tougher argument and conversation to actually have that happen. So as you go through the allotment time for adjustment, that's when you start putting the screws a little tighter and say, I can't really be that flexible because these things need to happen before we have to start enforcing this. I don't want any surprises when we get there. And of course, always you can hold or host trainings. This can be done as in the town hall meetings. It can be done separately. It can be done at the city, but these don't have to be done by city staff. SPEAR can help. Industry representatives can help. Trade associations can help. Manufacturers can help. Supply dealers have trainers. Installers have trainers. And then, of course, nonprofit advocates like SPEAR can help. Or, better yet, any third party out there should be happy to help with this training and have you host it in a room and put the training on for free. The better the installation, the fewer the number of inspections, therefore the bottom line profit for third parties get bigger. The company that I worked for, we did not charge for re-inspects. So if we got less inspections done per house, we made more money in the long run. Other third parties may charge for re-inspects, but what they're trying to do is to penalize you to try to get you to do the right thing. They'd probably be happy to lower a cost to a builder for inspections if they can get the buy-in from the builder and get these things done in 1 or 2 inspections, maybe 3 tops. And then you move on and you go straight to CO inspection. You don't slow down construction. You don't have delays in inspections. That's better for everybody. But if they're not all on the same page, when a third party, and it happens a lot, let's say you've got 14, 15 builders in your community, at any given time during the year, there will be third parties basically swapping contracts. Someone's taking this builder, this person's won this contract. And if they weren't trained right from the other third party, well, now they've got to start over from ground zero and start pushing their agenda on the training and what they need done. And I was always the one that would have to walk out and look at a builder's site, walk the builder's site, and then say, here's a short list of things that you're going to have to do before we can get you compliant. It's a surprise to them a lot because the other third party never called it out. Not really the fault of anyone other than the previous third-party verifier. But if you want to do the right thing and uphold people's compliance, you're going to have to make sure they get that done. So invite the following, of course, third-party verifiers, plan reviewers, building officials, HVAC contractor, insulation installers. And then, of course, you can do trainings that are, include all of these, but not limited to construction documents. What's all needed? What are you looking for in the construction documents? What's the reporting that needs to be done? What's the energy reporting? Of course, we can go through an energy modeling 101, kind of what's the bread and butter of what it takes to build an energy model. We can look at energy plan review, like what are we going to be doing from a plan reviewer standpoint? What are you looking at? What's most important to you? That's what I get asked a lot is, look, just give me the top three. What are the top three things as a plan reviewer that I should be looking for? Because a lot of this gets really complex and you could spend hours doing it and it may not make much of a difference, but what are the top three things? And of course, that includes manual J, manual S, and HVAC design is done correctly. And then, of course, from an inspector standpoint, proper duct installation, have trainings on that. What does it look like in the field? Walk a site and say, this looks good or this doesn't, and here's what needs to be done. There are ACCA and ASHRAE documents or brochures out there that show best practices for duct installation. I train on that quite a bit. And then, of course, proper installation. How is insulation graded? Why is it graded? What's the importance of it being graded? How to tell when it's not properly installed? And then, of course, energy framing. Are they using two stud corners? Are they using ladder blocking? You know, that used to be that's just an Energy Star thing. It's not an energy code thing. Technically, in my opinion, it should be the majority of how houses are built, not the outlier. We should all just be doing this to make a more consistent blanket of insulation without gaps. So you shouldn't be using dead corners with vacancies behind it with no insulation. That should not be done anymore in how we frame and all the people that are out there that know how to frame. Of course, I just talked about this, but manual J and S, if you are not collecting this as a city, both of these, not just one, you need to be. It's been in the code for quite some time. Several versions of the code has required this. A lot of people think, oh, well, this is just a 2021 thing. It's not. It started out with it being an Energy Star thing, and then it moved into the code, and now it's been in the code for quite some time. You need a manual J and S. Of course, if you're not familiar with what those things do, manual J and S, the J actually shows load calculations, the heat coming in and leaving a building at any particular time, annually on an annual basis. What is the BTUs to either heat or cool to offset the heat coming into the building? And so it's the design conditions must match the location. My thing is, as they say, what's the top three? Well, first, collect these manual J and S. Secondly, is it the correct one for the project being reviewed? Does it have the right address on it? Does it have the right weather data? This one shows that it's being built in Fredericksburg, Texas. They're using weather data that's closest international airport, which is San Antonio. If you get this one and you're in the Dallas area, that's incorrect. That's trying to go to a different climate zone. It needs to be using your closest data. There are some anomalies in some of the softwares that they have yet to update to make sense of the change in climate zones that we had with the 21. But it shows indoor, outdoor design conditions for winter and summer. It shows in BTUs how much it's going to take in heating to condition the house, how much in BTUs it's going to take to cool the home. And then, of course, after we do that, then the manual S actually shows the equipment manufacturer's data of the output of the equipment in BTUs that now need to meet or close to equal what the BTUs were on the manual J. So again, it goes back to, if you can see this, I'll just use my arrow, this equipment capacity as a percent of design. This is showing 105%. That means that the equipment matches load on this house, not by oversizing, not by undersizing, but it matches it as close to as it can. There's only so much you can do with the data from the manufacturer. You can't just ask for a specific BTU output. It's going to have to be as close as you can get it, and being slightly over isn't a big problem. But my big takeaway from that is, A, the project information needs to match the manual J. The design locations or the design temperatures should match what's code required. And then all the way at the bottom, you're going to say, what is the capacity as percent of design? It needs to be as close to 100% as possible. There's not really I think there now is software for this. Used to it had to be done manually. I think the software now includes, you can print out a manual S. So if they're designing this already, they should have availability just to print off a report that shows it once they've input the data from the manufacturer and what equipment's being used. But again, this is turned in for permit documents. This doesn't mean that when they go to the supply house, they're going to have the same equipment. They may be out of that equipment. And if they're out of that equipment, that means they're going to change it. Now you go out and find out the model numbers have changed. That may change the percent of design. It could or could not pass or fail it. If it's close to the same output of like one's a 3.5, the other one's a 3.5, but it's a different brand, that doesn't necessarily, it's not a red flag to say, oh, that's probably not going to pass anymore. It probably will because the capacity is close to being the same as what it was. So installation grading, we'll kind of go through this kind of quickly. I've done it a few times, but why is it important? This is what I talk about a lot in the trainings I do with cities when they say, well, we're not going to really rely on third parties. We're just going to kind of keep doing it ourselves. Our inspectors know what they're looking for. And my first question is, can you explain to me how you grade insulation? And if I don't get a good answer from that, that's kind of why I lean back and say that's why third parties, the specialists in energy efficiency and building science, need to be doing the inspections, because grading insulation and getting a poor installation can now fail the energy model. Very few people put worst case scenarios when they build an energy model. They use grade 1, maybe grade 2. They don't usually put grade 3 because that's the worst of the worst, and you don't want to have a house pass compliant with very poorly installed insulation. So poor installation leads to energy increased consumption and decreased occupant comfort. Poor installation can lead to incorrect HVAC sizing and reduced efficiency, kind of in a roundabout way. It's kind of getting there. Poor the BTUs and heat load changes. Poor installation changes or insulation changes for the model could cause it to no longer be compliant. As I said earlier, if we go from a 1 to a 3 because it's poorly installed, that even can be foam. That doesn't have to just be bats. That can be foam, could be poorly installed. Well, now it probably no longer passes or compliant with the energy code. And I put at the bottom, there's a draft out there right now. ResNet is the one that developed the grading of insulation 1, 2, and 3 for everyone to understand how to do it. They've got a draft out there now to rewrite the grading process. It's no longer going to be a grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 for third-party energy verifiers. It's going to be you either pass and meet manufacturer's installation instructions or you don't. And if you don't, then it's a fail. It's not I'm not going to remodel this as grade 3 and hope that it passes. It either is following manufacturer's instructions or it doesn't. So what does manufacturers of the instructions say? It basically says it must be a friction fit installation, no stapling required or necessary. Insulation should be fully filled and snugly fit, all framing cavities, no voids, no areas of compression, no gaps between insulation and framing members. That's hard to do because that's a perfect install, which if you're a third party on the phone or on the webinar today, you'll know that doesn't necessarily happen. You could probably count on one hand, maybe two hands when you saw a perfect install. The cavities with obstructions like wires, plumbing, and piping should also be cut around and filled with insulation on both sides to try to avoid gaps of compression or gaps or compression. Insulation must cut to fit snugly around electrical boxes, not just pushed behind it, which still happens today. A lot of times they just cut around it and then fill the back of it with polyseal. That's kind of not the way it's supposed to be done, but it's acceptable. And then for cavities with non-standard height and width, basically, is it cutting the insulation to a 1/2 inch or greater width so it can fit snugly? A lot of times what we see is they just fold it in half and crush it into the small gaps. That's not how it's supposed to be done, and that's diminishing the grade of the installation of that, because once you crush insulation, you reduce its R value. Just because a bat says R13, but it's only a 1/2 inch thick because somebody crushed it, doesn't mean it's no longer a 13. It's going to be effective overall R value is probably going to be more like a 6. So that's got to be avoided as much as possible. I won't go through these in depth, but this is kind of a snapshot of what grade 1 looks like. You see the cutaway for the air barrier on the back and the air barrier in the front, but you see just a little bit of shading areas and a little bit of dark areas at the top where you've got some gaps. This would be what's called a perfect install. I didn't normally see this in the field. You don't normally see all of this looking this nice. Then you see grade 2 has a lot more compressions. There's not a lot of gaps, but there's a lot of compressions. This is normally what we saw. Does this meet manufacturer's instruction details? No, it does not. So in the future, it may go from a pass or a fail, and it's not really going to be, well, just try to run the model at grade 2 and see if I pass. It needs to meet the expectations of manufacturer's instructions. They're the ones that come up with the R value, the effective R value. They're the ones that determine the R value by testing. If you do anything outside of their instructions, the effective R value is diminished. And that's why it's important to have insulation grading done on all buildings. And of course, grade 3, a whole lot worse. We still do see some of that sometimes. It's not usually the gaps like that, but it's the compressions. A lot of compressions. If you can look down a wall and you're looking parallel to the wall and you see a lot of facings of the stud, not the outer facing, but the side facing, like you see in this photo, it is not a grade 1. It is probably not a grade 2. It's probably can be considered a grade 3. That is more than 10% compressed of total surface area. That's easy to hit more than 10% that's compressed just because people are going too fast on the installation process. And this is another one. This will be one that I'll talk about. That I know this is a tough hill to climb. This is a large ask. But if you have the means in a city to be able to do this, conduct third-party energy verifier inspections. Go out on site with them. Ask them the right questions. What are they looking for? What makes sense to you? Why is this having to be done? Why are you calling this out? What's important to you as an energy rater? What are you looking for in particular when you're looking at framing or insulation or other things that have to meet compliance? Ask them how you, or look at some of their information that they're turning in. Try to help identify false data. And when I say false data, sometimes it's not, some of it's not intentional. Some of it is they just didn't change the data when they looked at it. In other words, it was supposed to be R15. They just put R15, but it clearly is only an R13. The guy didn't take the time to verify the actual R value in the wall. They just went with what was already listed in their system. So it's basically falsifying the data. Again, probably not intentional. It's an oversight, but it makes a huge difference when it comes to now, is it compliant? It may not be. And then know when it's wrong. Again, as I said earlier, just you're looking at, by the permit documents that you have on your iPad or your phone that you're accessing the portal, you're looking at it and it says R15. Well, if it doesn't have an R value marked on it, how do you verify it's R15? You need to look for certifications or certificates on site, or talk to the third party and go, how did you verify this was R15? Show me how you verify this so that I know that it's done right. And then, of course, watch how it's done. Just kind of looking at a blower door or a duct blaster and say, what is this doing to the house that's telling you this is passing or failing? Of course, taking notes and then basically pushing this on to the rest of your building officials and saying, look, I was on site with this guy. This is what they're looking for. This is what they said was important. Hold third-party verifiers accountable for subpar construction. They're not really the guys that frame the houses. They're not the ones that design how a house is to be framed. But insist that they host training for contractors that are possibly in question. If they're not using 2 stud corners or ladder blocking on the T-walls, well, that, in my opinion, that's a third party should be telling the framers, hey, we got to get this in line so we don't have gaps in insulation anymore. Because if you have those gaps, it's now graded at a grade 3, soon to be, it's just going to fail and it's no longer going to pass. Well, they can't really reframe the house. It needs to start moving towards the direction of getting the framing out of the old style framing into what's more of an energy framing style. Attend some of their trainings. If they're going to put a training on for an HVAC contractor and they're going to be there to show about how they can better air seal ducts for passing tests on a more consistent basis, attend some of those and learn from those trainings. This is another heavy lift, and I understand it, but it's just ideas that I put out there. Have on-site QA, QC of each builder. So if you have someone in your building official department, I know I've talked to a lot of cities lately that said, look, we're slowing down. We don't have as many permit requests. So now you've got guys that are looking for something to do. If there's one that's versed or at least certified in the IECC or the energy code of the IRC part of that, have them be your QA, QC, and have them just walk different builders in your community and just see who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong, and who could use some benefit of training to actually move them to a different level of energy. So that does the site built match the plans being detailed in the project or permit? That's looking at construction documents. If they need help with some of that, QA, QC of the documents, the framing, looking for openings in the air barrier. What products are being used to create the air barrier? Are they building a complete shell, or is it something open to the unconditioned attic, crawl space, or to the outside? If it's left that way, it's probably not passing a blower door. Truthfully, let's just put it that way. There's been a few that I've walked in a close proximity to where I live that I still question how it even passed a blower door, because framing was open to the attic in multiple places throughout that house. And then the insulation, we just talked about grading insulation, but look at how well it's installed. And then when you start identifying, wait a minute, that's not following manufacturer's instructions. There's a lot of compressions here. Well, now you've QA, QC the builder. Go talk to the builder and say, who's your third party? And they need to come in here and do some training from your installation contractors to better do the correct installation. And that's also for framing of T-walls and corners and insulation of headers. I'm still surprised at that. That is in the code. That is a base code requirement, insulated headers. It's not just an Energy Star thing. So filling headers with OSB or leaving nothing there is not compliant to an energy code. This has been in the code for quite some time in several versions of the code. But insulated headers, it still surprises me that this is not being done on a consistent basis. And I know I've showed this on a previous webinar, but I'll just quickly run through. Looks can be deceiving. That's why I say do QA, QC. This is just a short little wall over a fireplace. They show R15 bats, but as I've noticed in this picture, framing was done incorrectly. Not really incorrectly from a structural standpoint, but the depth of the cavity standpoint, the studs are turned on their widest face, not on their narrow. So my first thought is, how are we getting R15 on a cavity that's only 1.5 inches deep? And really what it turns out to be is they just tore it in half. And when they tore it in half, now that's no longer R15. Even though it says R15 on the bat, it's not R15 anymore. Should the whole house fail because of this one little area? Probably not. Should someone talk to the contractor about framing this differently to avoid these types of anomalies? Absolutely. And that's the third party that needs to bring that up to the framers and the installers of insulation to say, we've got to do something different here. So it needs to be looked at from all perspectives, and you need to have the backs of third parties to say, I agree with that. If you're cheating by cutting insulation down the middle, that's not what we're looking for. And of course, internal air barrier is still an issue under bathtubs, behind showers, under stairs, any place that would have had sheetrock if that structure wasn't built in front of it still needs an internal air barrier. That picture on the far right is that house that I was telling you about that I don't even know how it passed blower door. That is bats in the attic that you see that we're looking at it's next to a Smurf tube. It's the back of a media wall. It's a double wall. The back wall has netting over the insulation that should require and does require an internal air barrier, and it should be blocked at the top, but it's not. So running a blower door, I don't know how this house even passed because it's wide open to the attic, but it was sheetrocked and closed like this. And we've talked about this a second ago, but if you're having insulation in the walls that no longer have R values, so you've got foam, you've got cellulose, you've got blown fiberglass wall insulation, the code now allows you to call out and say, I need a certificate posted before sheetrock immediately after the installation that shows me what you've installed and that it meets compliance of the energy code. But if you look at this is a 2x4 wall. They actually put the exterior wall was 4 inches. We know by construction that that is not true. And if they're saying they're getting an R15 with foam because it's 4 inches deep, you are a 1/2 inch short of that because the framing is not 4 inches deep. It's 3.5. So if you do the math, it is not R15, but that's what the energy model was built with, showing compliance for the energy code as 15, but yet it's probably not. Certificates, this is the one posted at the final. On the final usually we see it on the electrical panel. So it's certificates that's posted. It shows this is what's actually been verified and tested from the third party as it went through construction to verify this for showing it on a certificate at the end. It doesn't have to be on the electrical panel. Code says it should be somewhere that's obvious, like next to an electrical panel, next to a water valve, on the water heater, on the HVAC equipment, somewhere that's easily accessible for a building official to verify, is all this stuff meeting compliance of the code? In my opinion, also, does this meet and or exceed what was permitted with? So if you look at the permit and it says that your cooling system was 15 SEER and you see this certificate and the person in the field wrote down 13 or 14, that changes everything. If it says in the model that it was a gas furnace and now it's a heat pump, that changes everything. If it says the walls were R15, the guy wrote 13 on this certificate, that changes the compliance documents. It should be re-verified to show compliance. So that's why you have a projected at the beginning and you have a certified, verified, confirmed at the end to verify that everything that was supposed to be done has been done and meets or exceeds the requirements of the code. So of course, at the bottom now they've added for additional in the 21, what's the code addition? In other words, when you do have a new adoption of code, they need to write on here, because you'll see it happen when you put a date out there of when you're going to have to enforce a new energy code. You'll see a rush of permit requests to get in before the change of the guard, per se, and they'll get a bunch of permit requests. So you may be 6-8 months into enforcement of a new energy code, but this home was permitted prior to the enforcement date. So now they're building houses almost a year after, and it's still having to be enforced of the older code, not the newer code, because they rushed it with permit requests. You could somehow head that off by knowing that's a possibility of what's going to happen and prepare for that, so you don't have to have that issue of confusion in the field about what's going to happen and when. And of course, this is the in the biz, we like to call it the confirm rating. This is where code says you need to get a confirm rating. So code calls out a compliance report generated for submission prior to obtaining a certificate of occupants shall include the following. And that's probably that certificate we had just before that's usually posted on the electrical panel. But if you're not seeing that, again, that's half the equation. That's telling you what was actually verified. It's not rerunning the model to actually show that it's still compliant. So code calls out that a final confirm rating needs to be submitted for a certificate of occupants. It shows on here what's all required to have that. This looks like it could be referring to before the one we just talked about on the slide before that. But that is not just the software generated compliance report. It's the data that was collected in the field has now been replacing the data that was in the projected model. So now they rerun it and verify that it still meets compliance. For example, there's been many times like a home is permitted using Energy Star, and for some reason the builder isn't wanting to conform to certain things, or they missed the target on something and they can no longer certify Energy Star. Well, now you're going to have them rerun the model and just do a code only and show confirm or projected and confirm that it meets the energy code for the base code, not for Energy Star, because what they've done is changed the pathway that they permitted with to something different just so they can finish and get a CO and move forward. So that's another moving target that actually changes in the field. So there's not any more questions or discussions that's come up. We've got a few more minutes. I'll go through the next slide. You guys want to post a question, we can talk about it. And as I did my previous webinars, once we end this one, I'll leave the mic open and we can talk about things on the fly if you want to. But thanks for joining us. We have another webinar coming up on October 31st at 10:30 a.m. It's titled Commercial Building Codes and Commissioning. Our presenter is Jerry Kettler. He is from the AET, which is the Air Engineering and Testing out of Dallas. He's done some training with us before in the past. This course will guide participants through the necessary steps for ensuring code compliance, highlighting the enforcement activities and critical success for commissioning. So on here, you'll see kind of what you're going to learn from that. It's the national standards for that commissioning process overview, code specific requirements, code enforcement, and then the roles of a commissioning provider. So if you haven't registered for that, it was part of the newsletter that went out earlier. Go ahead and make sure you register for that and be part of it. And this is my contact information here. If you want to snapshot that or screenshot that, feel free to share it with anybody that you can. I'd be more than happy to, and tickled to death if I got invited to more building department meetings to help discuss and navigate them through an adoption of the energy code. So I've got a few trainings that I'm going to towards the end of the week in Houston. That's exactly what we'll be doing, is talking about the difference between the 21 and the 24 and what it is that they need to look for and what's going to best fit them as they move forward. So I'd be happy to spend the time to do that and go through it. So thanks again for joining us. I will end the webinar here, and then I will be online for just a few more minutes if you'd like. Thanks again for being here. Appreciate it.